The first director of the CIA just handed the press a classified Air Force document, and then he never spoke of it again. On the morning of February 27, 1960, journalists arriving at the newsrooms of America's most important papers found something they hadn't expected. A photocopy, an official United States Air Force document, and a signed statement from a man whose name alone could stop a room cold. Roscoe Hillenkoetter, Vice Admiral of the U.S. Navy, survivor of the attack on Pearl Harbor, former commander of the USS Missouri, and the first director of the CIA, the most powerful intelligence agency in the world. He was breaking his silence. The document was an internal Air Force directive signed on December 24, 1959 by General Richard O'Keefe. It was unambiguous. Unidentified flying objects were to be treated as a serious matter. UFO investigations were, according to the document itself, directly related to the Air Force's responsibility for the defense of the United States. Let that settle for a moment. The same Air Force that called sightings mass hallucinations, that publicly humiliated veteran pilots at press conferences, that dismissed civilians who reported UFOs as people who would do well not to expose their ignorance, had internally distributed, on Christmas Day, 1959, a formal order classifying UFOs as a potential national security threat. The double standard was now officially documented. Hillenkoetter hadn't arrived at this moment by accident. For 3 years, he had been quietly assembling a dossier of contradictions. Since 1957, he had served on the board of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, the most serious civilian UFO research organization in the country. And what he saw deeply troubled him. He wrote to the New York Times, "Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are seriously worried about UFOs, but through official ridicule and secret data restriction, American citizens are being kept in the dark." Days after the document's release, a second bombshell detonated, this time in Alamogordo, New Mexico. The civilian organization APRO announced it possessed physical evidence of the reality of flying saucers. Not a photograph, not a witness account, metal. The story had begun in September 1957 on the coast of Ubatuba, Brazil. Fishermen reported seeing a fast-moving flying object explode over the ocean. Brilliant fragments rained down onto the beach and into the water. Some were collected. When analyzed by Brazilian laboratories, the material proved to be magnesium, but of a purity the equipment of the era could not explain. Close purities, a composition no known metallurgical facility produced in 1957. Brazilian physician Olavo Fontes sent samples to APRO in the United States. When Director Coral Lorenzen offered the fragment to the Air Force for analysis, she received a calculated reply. They would examine the material, but only on their own terms, with no independent access to results, inside the Technical Intelligence Center in Dayton, Ohio, behind the same veil of secrecy that covered everything the Air Force touched on this subject. APRO refused, and rightfully so. Because what had happened when researchers brought a fragment to the local Air Force laboratory was too telling to ignore. The spectrographer operator reported having accidentally burned the entire sample without obtaining an exposed plate. The fragment had vanished. No recorded analysis, no documented result. The only sample of potentially extraterrestrial metal in civilian hands had been destroyed accidentally by an Air Force technician. Meanwhile, more than 50 commercial pilots with over 15 years of experience were publicly declaring the government's censorship policy absolutely ridiculous. Each had witnessed at least one UFO, several multiple. Air traffic controllers in Seattle had locked radar on an object at 3,000 feet, moving in patterns impossible for any known technology. F-102 interceptors were scrambled. The object accelerated out of range. The Air Force's explanation,
probably a weather balloon. The controllers simply stopped giving interviews. What Hillenkoetter's directive revealed wasn't merely institutional hypocrisy, it was something more disturbing. Proof that two parallel realities were operating simultaneously. The public one, constructed to reassure, and the classified one, constructed to understand or contain something that the generals themselves could not explain. 60 decades later, in 2021, the U.S. Department of Defense created the UAP Task Force and confirmed the subject had never stopped being investigated. Declassified documents showed the same cycle repeating. Military aircraft filming objects with no identifiable propulsion moving at impossible speeds. Reports were filed, names were redacted, and the public received silence. What Hillenkoetter interrupted on that February morning in 1960 was not merely a public relations policy, it was a tacit agreement between power and the unknown. The agreement to never admit that something was flying in American skies that no one, anywhere in government, could identify. In 1962, 2 years after the scandal, Hillenkoetter submitted his resignation from NICAP. No public explanation, no statement. He simply stopped. The man who survived Pearl Harbor, who built the CIA with his own hands, who dared to challenge the Air Force with classified documents in hand, withdrew into complete silence until his death in 1982. What did he see that made him go quiet? That question 65 years later still has no answer. There is no statement, no letter, no recording. There is only the silence of a man who knew more than any civilian ever knew, and who chose to carry that weight alone until the end. 65 years later, the skies still hold the answer, and we still look up, waiting.